Greetings and welcome to my presentation on paediatric exercise physiology, more specifically on VO2max testing in adolescent footballers aged 13 to 18. I'll be giving you some context of the topic today and then review some relevant contemporary literature, rounding off with a summary of my findings. So for context, to briefly explain paediatric exercise physiology, it refers to children and adolescents up to the age of 18. Its main focus is on the effects of physical activity on the development and growth of physiological systems. It's important to understand this topic because as responses to exercise in young athletes occur, they will be different to adults. In addition to that, physiological responses between adolescents themselves may differ. This is down to like sex, growth, puberty, maturation age. Overall, understanding physiological responses in adolescents will help with real life application. For example, understanding what stage of puberty different young athletes are at may benefit the setup and delivery of training sessions in the future. It could benefit the adolescent's physiological and psychological development also. So, on to some context of VO2max testing. It's the gold standard measurement of an individual's aerobic capacity. It's important to understand how this can be most effectively used for adolescents. Obtaining an accurate measure itself of VO2max in young footballers may be difficult as prepubertal children demonstrate a blunted response due to reasons like bioenergetic profile not being modified by training. Usually it's only neural adaptations until the latter of childhood that occur within this age group. In addition to that, running economy, muscle mass, body weight is also lower in prepubertal children, so that could affect physiological factors like heart rate and stroke volume and in turn affect VO2max testing and results. In addition to that, peak height velocity is a physiological factor in adolescents that may affect VO2max testing. Peak height velocity is the time period an adolescent is at the fastest growth spurt, so the timing, the tempo, the duration of this is different within adolescents. Usually it's around 13 years old in boys and 11-year-old in girls. This could provide a huge variance of test results in similar age adolescents if one child is at a faster growth rate than another. This means they're going to have larger bones, stronger muscles, increased aerobic capacity, so they're obviously going to provide different results at a similar age. So it's obviously clear to see how this could be unfair and misinterpreted in VO2max testing. It's something that coaches should definitely be aware of. After providing some context, here's a review of some of the literature. So this is the first one I looked at, Kavcic et al. 2012. This study consisted of 15 Slovenian youth national team players aged 17 with a standard deviation of plus or minus 2. It used the 20-metre shuttle runs adapted by Ramsbottom's 1988 study and found that it may be hard to predict VO2max in young footballers. It can be viewed as a good paper though, as its aim was to compare estimated and direct VO2max measures. Practitioners can use that to take away into their own practices and view which is more suitable for them in their situation, so whether to test directly or estimate their adolescent's VO2max. However, with this paper I instantly noticed that it did not mention the sex of the players. This would make it hard for any practitioners to replicate this study. Obviously sex differences will occur, like body mass and maturation, so it is really important to think about that. I also noticed that for the procedure, the players were not explained the purpose of the test and it was also performed on 4G. These factors may have affected motivation for the youth players, reducing their potential of working at maximum intensity. Obviously, it doesn't replicate a grass field-based scenario, considering they're just on plastic turf instead of the real pitches that they play and train on. Here's a table that I've taken from the study. It shows the relationship between predicted and actual VO2max. Here, circled in red, you can see that it uses relative VO2max units. As these young footballers may be any age from 15 to 19, using relative VO2max could be a mistake. For example, a player in this age bracket could be more developed in terms of puberty and maturation than someone else, meaning they're going to have, again, larger muscles, bigger bones, body mass will be increased, so it will reduce relative VO2max results as there'll be less oxygen uptake per kilo. This may represent that an individual is less aerobically fit than somebody with lower body mass, so they may seem like they're less fitter even though they could be more aerobically fitter. As an example, here we are. So an individual who produces 3,800 ml of oxygen per minute with a body mass of 84 kilos would have a relative score of 45 ml per kilo per minute, whereas someone in the same age group with 3,500 ml oxygen consumption at 70 kilos would result in a VO2max of 50 ml per kilo per minute. So here's presenting that individual 2 is more aerobically fit even though they produce less oxygen per minute. This could cause problems for a practitioner, potentially working individual 2 harder during training and testing as they think they're more capable when they're just not. In terms of considerations, this paper should confirm the sex of the participants and not assume we could guess it's male. They should ensure that VO2max testing is also similar to a game situation to improve motivation and adherence, and obviously make it relatable to real game scenarios. And then in addition to that, absolute measures would be recommended by myself, ensuring that psychological factors do not make the results misleading. So the next study here I had a look at was one by Trianto and Co in 2021. This paper looked at VO2max in youth footballers aged 14 to 17, along with the effects of small-sided games and vital lung capacity. A positive relationship was found between high vital lung capacity and greater VO2max scores. So some of the key points to mention are that this paper also used relative VO2max, which obviously is a problem like I've mentioned about the physiological differences between developing adolescents. However, the use of this it could be seen as useful if the test is completed with another test alongside it, so there can be comparisons made. So for example here, Trianto used vital lung capacity testing to separate players for training and VO2max testing. They could then compare relative VO2max based on their initial lung capacity, so all the high lung capacity group were put together. This would make it sort of more equally matched and would allow a similar standard between the groups so they can actually compare their relative scores, rather than having someone really high lung capacity, some with a really low capacity, and then obviously the relative scores are going to be all out the window due to those physiological differences I mentioned. So that was one of the positives. Another one was the use of small-sided games. It's pretty good. Unlike the previous study, it increased physical condition and motivation, so it gave the youth players an understanding and a sense of purpose for what was being done. Also, as mentioned, separating the group on vital lung capacity will allow more competitive comparable VO2 results. Things to consider again is sex. Feels like it's going to keep cropping up, and also body weight could be taken into account for the relative scores. Another consideration for this paper and also other papers is to offer what can be done with these results post-testing. A lot of these studies just do the testing and then adolescents carry on with their training with their normal practitioners. But by offering these in terms of what to do after training and maybe what to do after the testing and during the testing, then it would be something for practitioners to be able to take away. The final paper I had a look at here was a study investigating a range of factors and testing variables on youth players. This paper analysed the correlation between workloads with maturity, oxygen consumption, heart rate, body composition and more. The participants were under 14, there was 21 male players. The testing and observation period was done over a 26-week period, which is obviously good for practitioners to use and follow. This is as it's a long enough time to view behavioural and physiological changes, so then practitioners can adapt it themselves and use it for their own training sessions if they recognise similar patterns. The results showed no correlation between maturity phase and VO2max, however. Again, this could be the fact that it is down to relative VO2max. To reiterate, if an individual is further through the process of growth and puberty, they are likely to have an increased body mass, which may decrease the relative result, so they may not seem as fit if people don't understand what relative VO2max is. To review this in more depth, it's good to perform research over a longer period of time for reliability. Like I said, the 26-week period helped with reliability, accuracy, and other practitioners to take ideas from that. Also, this paper's considered body composition of the under 14s when testing their VO2max. So it's important because they could therefore understand why some more developed individuals may produce lower scores, so they may actually understand about the relative VO2max testing. In terms of considerations, we know that boys' puberty is about 16 to 17 completion age. Therefore, these players will still be going through puberty at different rates. So some of these may have been through peak height velocity, some may haven't. Therefore, it might be worth explaining to these players that it's okay if their results fluctuate. Within this study, the players were separated for testing via playing position. Considering at under 14 level, most adaptations would have occurred until the testing point would have been neurological. So I'd recommend separating them based on naked eye, so seeing who looks more developed than others, who performs better in training in terms of aerobic capacity. This would increase the chances of the groups producing similar results based on physiological age rather than just based off playing position. It would save embarrassment within the groups and reduce a lack of motivation in some players. Finally, this study estimated VO2max using relative measures, like I said, and they also didn't explain how it was done, so it's sort of out the window there. Therefore, this takes me on to my summary and my future recommendations. So, field testing was rarely used, so like I said, that could affect motivation and understanding in real game scenario. In addition to that, gender is rarely specified and expected to be assumed male within a lot of these studies. Most under 18 teams now are mixed genders, because obviously women's football is becoming increasingly popular. Things need to be done about that, so we have research for women in the future. In addition to that, relative VO2max is mostly used when testing footballers, which is good to measure against yourself, but not really to compare within a group of young footballers. It may affect, their mental well-being if they're getting embarrassed by certain scores, etc. So it's more appropriate to standardise VO2max results. And finally, injury risk is rarely noted of. Children or adolescents may be more vulnerable to injury factors like growth spurt, maturation, imbalance, structural laxity and lack of motor and cognitive skills. So really needs to be considered. So after that, here are my references. and thank you very much for listening.